And here's the story of the last year of Dr. King's life. And I think that by sharing with you a bit about that last year, it might help contextualize where we find ourselves today in 2016, how we measure where we are, and how we plot a path forward. But we have to go back to King to do that. I believe that Dr. King, these are my words, this is my assessment. I regard Dr. King as the greatest American this country has ever produced. That's my assessment. Not a great Americans. There's FDR and there's Abraham Lincoln. I can do this all day long. And you have your own point of view, but since I'm the speaker, I get to espouse mine over the microphone. I regard Dr. King as the greatest American this country has ever produced. And yet, all these years later, can I keep it real? Can I keep it real? All these years later, we are honoring Dr. King on the cheap. We're honoring Martin on the cheap. I wonder whether or not at most of these celebrations honoring Dr. King, whether he could actually get in the room. Last year we honored, celebrated the year before, 50 years since the March on Washington. We celebrated that grand 50th anniversary, and I watched all the speeches. I happened to be on tour for something at that time, maybe the Death of the King book. And I remember being in a hotel room watching the program on C-SPAN for a few hours, celebrating Dr. King and the March on Washington 50 years later. And I listened to those speakers and what they had to say. And then I thought about what Martin might say had he shown up that day. And it is the case, since I've done this a few times, that most places I go, if Martin were to show up and offer his own critique, offer his own assessment, they'd run that Negro out the building. If Martin were asked, can you show us, as we are so often asked, I mentioned earlier my three friends who were surrogating for Secretary Clinton. And so oftentimes in my life, I can't speak for them, in my life, I've been asked when I'm doing things similar, well, Mr. Smiley, can you give us a copy of your script? What do you want to say? We want to keep you on message, etc., etc. If Martin were asked what he was going to talk about before he got up, that Negro might be disinvited. Because the message that Martin had 50 years ago and the message he'd have today is so subversive that some of us can't handle it. They couldn't handle Martin then, and they can't handle Martin now. Because his message is pregnant with such power. It envelops such truth. It is so subversive again that most of us can't even handle it. See, here's the problem when you talk about Martin. Most of us have Martin kind of in a freeze frame at the March on Washington in 1963. So all we know about Martin is, I have a dream. If I were to ask you to tell me what Martin said that day, the most that you could probably do is to quote the line we already heard today, that I want my children to live in a nation where they'll not be judged by the color of their skin, but by what? Content of their character. I ain't gonna ask you to go no further. I know that's what most of us know. And I ain't even mad at you because it ain't your fault. It ain't your fault because that's the loop that the media plays around this time every year. They never want to go into the rest of that speech because that speech itself was too subversive. It's only when Martin got to the dream part that everybody got happy. Everybody started shouting and dancing and speaking in tongues on the I have a dream part. But the rest of that speech, we really don't want to wrestle with. So let me just encourage you when you go home today to Google that speech. And look at what Martin was saying before he got to the dream. And the challenge he was offering America. They don't like to play that part of the speech. And that's the speech he's most regarded for. Well, that was in 1963. Martin died too soon. He's assassinated, as you know, at the age of 39 in 1968. But I wasn't a math major, speaking of education, but I think if he was speaking at the March in 63 and he died in 68, I think that means he lived 5 more years. And over the course of that 5 years, Martin evolved. He evolved. And that's the Martin that most of us don't want to deal with, too subversive. In 63, Martin is saying that he has a dream. In the last year of his life, Martin is saying publicly that the dream that I had 5 years ago has turned into a nightmare. This is Martin, not Tavis. This is Martin. These are his words. That the dream that I had in 63 is now a nightmare. In 63, Martin is talking about integration. By the last year of his life, Martin is saying that for all that we've done to fight for integration, I believe that we have integrated into a burning house. Those are Martin's words, that we've integrated into a burning house. Can I tell you some more? I don't know if y'all can handle this next one. Hold on to your seat, Des Moines. Hold on to your seat. Martin is killed in Memphis on a Thursday night on the balconies, we all know, at the Lorraine Motel. The last phone call he had from the room was back to his church. Martin traveled all the time, but every Sunday, as any good pastor knows, you better be in your pulpit on Sunday morning. Wherever you've been during the week, you better get home on Sunday, especially if you want them tithes and offerings. So Martin always got back home on Sunday, no matter where he was. But he had to call in his sermon because back in the day, when you went to church on Sunday morning, they hand you the bulletin, right? With the order of service in the bulletin and what the sermon was going to be. And my favorite part, that blank page at the back for you to write your own notes from the sermon. So Martin had to call in his sermon no matter where he was every week. The last call he makes is to the church that he co-pastored with his father in Atlanta, Ebenezer. Talked to his father, talked to his mother, talked to his assistant, and told them on the phone what his Sunday morning sermon was going to be. This is Thursday evening. Martin, had he lived past Memphis and made it back to Atlanta on Sunday morning, was going to preach a sermon entitled, Why America May Go to Hell. That was his Sunday morning sermon. Why America may go to hell. Now the may is the operative word. He didn't declare America to hell. If we were going, he didn't condemn America to hell. He didn't consign America to hell. He said, why America may go to hell. That's the sermon that Martin was going to preach come Sunday morning had he made it back to Atlanta. Now, let's back up a year to find out why Martin was even considering preaching a sermon called Why America May Go to Hell. He's assassinated, as you know, on April 4, 1968. Back up 1 year to the day, almost to the hour, in New York City, at the Riverside Church, Martin delivers the most controversial speech of his life. It's called Beyond Vietnam. Watch this. April 4, 67, he gives the most controversial speech of his life. April 4, 68, they kill him. A year to the day, and I repeat, almost to the very hour, they assassinate Martin. Because a year prior, Martin had said something that America just couldn't handle. Here comes that word again. It was too subversive. So Martin goes to the Riverside Church in New York City, Upper West Side, and delivers a speech called Beyond Vietnam. And in this speech, Martin comes out as vociferously, as aggressively as he ever has against the war in Vietnam. And in that speech, you can Google it when you get home, in that speech, Martin utters these words. He calls America the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. The greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Then Martin goes on in that same speech to offer the following. He says to America that if we don't get serious about what he called the triple threat facing our democracy, we're going to lose our democracy. We have got to get serious about this triple threat facing America. What was that triple threat? Racism, poverty, and militarism. Racism, poverty, and militarism. Some of y'all see where I'm going now, don't you? Racism, poverty, and militarism. The triple threat that Martin laid out in the speech on that day, April 4, 1967. Martin was the most regarded man in America, on the top of the list every year for years running of the most admired people in America, the youngest recipient ever of the Nobel Peace Prize. Martin was the man before he stood to that podium. But after that Negro sat down from giving that speech, the next day all hell broke loose. April 5, 1967, Martin is disinvited to the White House. LBJ and MLK have been friends. They worked together to pass the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. They've been boys. But Martin has now got on the wrong side of the war question, standing in his truth on the wrong side of the war question with the president, and now he's disinvited to the White House. If that wasn't bad enough, then quicker than right now and sooner than at once, the media turned on him. The mainstream media. I'm not talking about Fox News. They weren't around then. You can imagine what O'Reilly and Hannity and you can imagine what Fox News would have done with a Negro calling America the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. They would have tore him a new one had they been around. But Fox News wasn't around then. But they didn't need Fox News because Time Magazine did the job for them. The Washington Post did the job for them. The New York Times did the job for them. I'm talking about liberal establishments. They ripped Dr. King and said, and I quote, that he had outlived his usefulness. Mm-hmm. That he had done damage to himself and to his people. So the White House turns on him. And then the mainstream media turns on him. And then, God help us, the black media turned on Dr. King. And after the black media turned on him, then the Negro leaders turned on him. I ain't making this up. The NAACP and Roy Wilkins, folk who had marched with Dr. King. Roy Wilkins and the NAACP turned publicly against Dr. King. Ralph Bunche, another Nobel laureate, for his armistice disagreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, he wins the Nobel Peace Prize as well. So there are two American Negroes who have the prize. Bunche happens to be on the board of directors at the NAACP. Bunche on the board. When they wrote their resolution to put it up for a vote to condemn Dr. King, Ralph Bunche, another Nobel laureate, thought the resolution wasn't tough enough on Martin. So he put some more language in it. And they passed a resolution condemning Martin publicly. That's the NAACP. Then the Urban League, Whitney Young steps up. And they go after Martin publicly. Then Carl T. Rowan, the black journalist of his day, goes after Dr. King in print and on radio. And one by one, black leaders start lining up to condemn Martin King for trying to tell the truth. And then white America turns on him. The last poll in his life, the Harris poll, found when Martin, in the last year of his life, woke up and saw the paper about his poll numbers. 3/4, hear me now, in the last year of his life, 3/4 of the American people thought that Dr. King was persona non grata. 75%. I know y'all having a hard time trying to juxtapose what I'm telling you with the streets and the libraries and the schools and the holiday and the postage stamp and the monument and the bust in the Oval Office. I know y'all trying to figure out how in the world is it possible. If that's not bad enough, inside of black America, the last poll found that almost 60% of his own people thought he was irrelevant. And then Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the most powerful black congressman, piled on him publicly. If that ain't bad enough, then Thurgood Marshall. Yes, that Thurgood Marshall called Martin a name that I can't even repeat on this stage. All these Negroes turned on Martin King in the last year of his life. And then Dr. King, after being disinvited to the White House, is now disinvited from black churches. He cannot get into black churches to preach on Sunday mornings. And then in New York, they won't publish his text. He's trying to publish another book, and they won't give him a book deal. They won't run his op-eds in the newspaper. And then Martin dies broke, and his friend Harry Belafonte had to pay for his funeral. That's how Martin died April 4, 1968. It is the story that most Americans don't know, and the story that we're going to tell as told in this text and now in film, because America needs to wrestle with the dark side, the night side of the hell that we put Martin Luther King Jr. through, as all these years later, almost 50 years after his death, we celebrate him, to my original thesis, on the cheap. And we celebrate him on the cheap with all the things I just mentioned. Martin, let me be very clear, Martin deserves all of that and then some. He's earned it. He deserves the holiday. He deserves the postage stamp. He deserves the schools and the streets and the libraries and the monument, all of that. He deserves every bit of it. But if Martin were here, he'd much more appreciate us coming to terms with his triple threat facing this democracy 50 years later. Racism, poverty, and militarism. I get asked all the time, what would King say were he here? I can't speak for Martin. I don't have the authority to do that. No one does, for that matter. But the beautiful thing about being a prophet is that you speak for yourself. You speak for yourself in time and into time. That's what prophets do. So when you read what Martin had to say, it was as relevant then as it is now. And so when if you want to know how you ought to judge these candidates who are in your face everywhere asking for your support, I flew in last night on the plane next to Rick Santorum. And I said a prayer for that brother. I don't know how you can be polling at 1% and it's -4 in Iowa where you keep coming back for more punishment. I don't understand that. But I said a prayer for him. God bless you in your pursuits. But if you want to know how to judge these candidates that are seeking your support, the Democrats and the Republicans, you want to judge the leaders in the White House and in Congress, judge them by the Kingian standard. That's how I judge elected officials. I ask them these questions before they run, while they're running, when they ask for my vote. I want to know, where do you stand on these issues? Because these are the issues that are threatening to tear America apart at its very fiber. I believe, let me be very bold about this, I believe that America's future, that the destiny of this democracy is inextricably linked to how seriously we take the legacy of Martin King. That's how serious this is. That if this democracy doesn't take that challenge seriously, we are in trouble. If we don't wrestle with that triple threat, God help us all. And when you look 50 years almost after his assassination and where we are on the issue of racism, good Lord. Black boys and black men still being shot in the streets like dogs and cops getting away with it. Racism, still the most intractable issue in this country. Amen. I've had my critique of my President Barack Obama because I believe that when you elect people, you ought to hold them accountable. His job is to be president. My job is to hold you accountable. You do your job and I'll do mine. I love you. Amen. I voted for you in 2008. I voted for you in 12. I'm proud of you. I want to see you succeed. But I'm going to hold you accountable to what you said you were going to do when you ran. Amen. I do so in love. I do so in love. And yet, I'm the first to admit there's never been a president that's caught the kind of hell that Barack Obama has caught. The headwind that he's caught. The obstructionism he's had to deal with. And you can't tell me that race ain't got something to do with it. Amen. Racism is still the most intractable issue in this country. This book, just out now, The Covenant, 10 years later, in every major economic category, it pained me. This is not a book of my opinions. I went to the academics, I went to the researchers and said, show me the data. 10 years later, where is Black America? Martin's community, where is Black America on these 10 issues? Health and housing and criminal justice and education and environment. Digital divide. Where are we on these issues 10 years later? It pains me, I've been saying this repeatedly over the last 2 weeks on tour, that black folk have lost ground in every major economic category over the last 10 years. In every major economic category. We've lost ground over the last 10 years. Black children born today, speaking of education, I'm coming back to this. Black children born today, the data tell us will not do as well as their parents have done. And so Martin and all of our ancestors are turning over in their graves today. At the thought that after all the struggle and all the sacrifice and all the struggle, that we've arrived at a place in the era of the first black president where black kids aren't going to do as well as their parents have done. Something's wrong. What progress have we really made on race relations? And if you read the studies, I try not to get caught up in polls and studies. I ain't running for nothing, so I don't have to read these polls every day. But if you read what Pew Research tells us, most Americans now think that we are just as bad on race relations now as we were 8 years ago. How is that possible? I thought y'all told me that when Obama got elected, we were going into a post-racial America. What happened? So we still have this consternation, this conflict when it comes to race in America. Don't get me talking about Martin's second threat, poverty. Poverty is now threatening our very democracy. Poverty is now a matter of national security. You heard me right. Poverty is not just threatening our democracy, it's a matter of national security. Why, Tavis? Glad you asked. Because 1% of the people cannot continue to own and control 40% of the wealth. Watch this. 400 individuals, the 400 wealthiest Americans, have wealth equivalent to the bottom 150 million citizens. 400 folk, wealth equivalent to the bottom 150 million fellow citizens. Those numbers are not sustainable. And so poverty, in a very real way, is a matter of national security and, frankly, threatening our very democracy. We don't want to be honest about this. This is why, not that anybody want me to run anyway. I ain't naive. Nobody's asking me to run anyway. But I couldn't run for president anyway. Because you can't tell enough truth. You can't tell enough truth. Because the truth of the matter is that we are moving fast away from being a democracy. The truth is we're moving closer to oligarchy. We're moving closer to plutocracy, while folk keep acting like it's a democracy. We're getting away from the ideals of this country. That's why I can't run, because you can't say that on the campaign trail and get no votes. But that's the truth. So we're not gaining ground the way we should on the issue of race. Poverty is threatening our very democracy. And do we really have to waste any time talking about militarism? The budget of the military continues to grow. I listen to these candidates as they run, talk about where they are on the military budget. Listen to them, ask the tough questions. Ask them what their plan is to eradicate poverty in this country. Can I be clear on poverty? This ain't no skill problem, it's a will problem. Do we have the will? We could eradicate poverty in this country in 25 years if we had the will. So now listen, where are you on the militarism question? The military-industrial complex. Where are you on that? Why are you so hawkish? Where are you on the poverty question? How are we going to eradicate poverty in this country? Where are you on increasing the minimum wage to a living wage for all Americans? Jobs with a living wage. Where are you on that question? On the race question, on the xenophobia question, where are you? I've been on a tear for the last week, not because I have anything against Donald Trump personally. I don't know him that well. I've just met him a few times. But the media and Donald Trump, can I just say this right quick? I'm going to say it anyway. The media and Donald Trump seem to have a codependent relationship. It's a classic example of codependence. It's worse than that. It's quid pro quo. You give me and I'll give you. So the reason that Donald Trump, I love how my colleagues, I've been on this for a week now, I love how my colleagues keep talking about Trump as if he's just magically rising in the polls. Just mysteriously going up in the polls. But they disconnect that rise in the polls from the message that's being delivered. When you talk to the dark side, when you talk about the nice side of America, it's easy to see why your numbers go up. So Donald didn't like the fact that a week or so ago on one of the Sunday shows, I referred to him, I was asked about him, I just said, all I called him was, I just called him an unrepentant, irascible, religious and racial arsonist. That's all I said. That's all I said. An unrepentant, irascible, religious and racial, that's all I said. And within a matter of hours, he took to Twitter to give me the business. Somebody asked me, what's it feel like being trolled on Twitter by Donald Trump? I said, it feels like being on Nixon's enemies list. Where does the badge of honor, I guess? But while Donald Trump was tweeting up a storm about me, he still never got around to condemning the white supremacist group running robocalls for him in Iowa. Still not condemning them yet. And the media, complicit in this, won't ask him about it. Because we love this. My industry loves this. Some news organizations stop even going to the Democratic and Republican conventions because there ain't no news there. It's too predictable. But oh Lord, we got to fight on the left and on the right. And they love this. And Trump is making money and getting ratings and selling newspapers. And ain't nobody going to check him. So this codependency continues. And so the media is complicit. And if the media is not going to tell you the truth, and you're not going to ask the tough questions, and you're not going to judge them by that Kingian standard of racism and poverty and militarism, then how, I ask you, do we get at the truth? I told y'all these are serious times. These are serious issues that demand serious conversations and serious solutions. And somebody's got to hold these folk accountable, the candidates and the media writ large. Now, how's all this tied to the notion of educating our children? Very simply. When children are denied access to an equal high quality education because of their race or because of their class, that's a problem. And America pays the largest price because we have all this talent, all this black and brown talent that goes unnurtured. How does America regain its place as the world's leader in all the categories we used to lead in if we're going to write off a whole generation of young people by denying them access to an education? It troubles me that in this country that you have the right to carry a weapon. You have the right to free speech and all the other rights that we have, but you are not guaranteed as a child access to an equal high quality education. Amen. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Let me pivot from Martin to Malcolm. Bit of history here. Both of them killed at the age of 39. But Malcolm said that education is our passport to the future. Tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. Let me pivot back again to Martin one more time. The reason why we have these celebrations, I'm going to go back to Brother Brian again.
All right, Brother Brian.
Commemoration. Isn't that what he said? Commemoration. We commemorate because it allows us to slow down just for a few minutes.
Yes.
To consider what the grand contributions were of those persons who we honor. And Martin was right 50 years ago. He's right 50 years later. Amen. About the fact that we are going to lose this democracy if we don't take on racism and poverty and militarism. Now, I know this ain't the speech you came to hear about I have a dream and all the flowery stuff I could have laid out for you, but I want you to take a fresh look at Martin. A fresh look at Martin. I want you to look at Martin anew and see what a prophet he really was. And then ask yourself whether or not he was right about the future of this democracy being tied to those three issues. Then ask yourself, what are we doing to advance on those issues? And ask yourself, what are the candidates saying about these issues? Amen. And ask yourself, are we not a half century later continuing to honor Martin on the cheap? Amen. Martin put it this way: cowardice asked, is it safe? Expediency asked, is it politic? Vanity asked, is it popular? But conscience asked, is it right? And every now and then we must take positions that are either safe, politic, comfortable, or convenient, but we do it because our conscience tells us that it's right. At this critical moment in America's history, if our individual and collective consciences are not pricked by what Martin had to say a half century ago, and if we can't conclude that Martin was right and we better get serious about the work that needs to be done, amen, then God help us all. With that said, Happy King Day.